हेलो नमस्कार एंड यू हैव स्टार्टेड वाचिंग सस्टेनेबल दुनिया विथ मी सौरभ शुक्ला। तो आज के इस वीडियो में हम डिस्कस करेंगे अबाउट क्लाइमेट जस्टिस, जिसमें कि हम समझेंगे कि क्लाइमेट जस्टिस क्या होता है, क्यों ये इम्पॉर्टेंट है और वो कौन कौन से स्टेप्स हैं जिसकी मदद से हम क्लाइमेट जस्टिस को अचीव कर सकते हैं। सो अगेन दिस इज गोइंग टू बी वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग एंड इन्फॉर्मेटिव टॉपिक, सो प्लीज वॉच द वीडियो टिल द एंड एंड लेट्स स्टार्ट। So now if we talk about the climate justice, so academically it means putting equity and human rights at the core of decision making and action on climate change, taking into account historical responsibility, the rights of vulnerable populations and the need for global cooperations. Climate justice concept has been widely used to refer to the unequal historical responsibilities that countries and communities bear in relation to the climate crisis. Climate justice also suggests that the countries, industries, businesses, and people that have become wealthy from emitting large amount of greenhouse gases have a historical responsibility to help those countries that are affected by climate change, particularly the most vulnerable countries and communities, who often are the ones that have contributed the least to this crisis of climate change. If we look at the data which is given on the screen, we can see that on the left hand most side, this one is the historical carbon dioxide emissions from 1850 till 2021. Then the next bar is about contribution to these of these countries to the global warming between 1850 to 2021. Then the next bar represents about the current greenhouse gas emissions as of 2021, and the last bar is about their current population. So if we look at these four bar graphs, so we can see that like most of the countries are the developed countries that are responsible for the historical carbon dioxide emissions. So you can see the 19% historical emissions is from United States of America, then 13% is from European Union, then 5% from the Russian Federation, and 25% of is around like 25% of the emission is from rest of the G20 countries. And the contribution, if we look at the contribution, then around 17% of the global warming is from USA, then 10% is from the European Union, again 6% from Russian Federation, and 22% from the uh, rest of G20 countries. And if we look at the least developed countries and the rest of the world, then you can see they all lie in the bottom, and comparatively it is less. The contribution to the global warming and historical emissions is less if we compare to the developed countries. So there is a lot of historical responsibility that lies with developed countries to support these developing and least developed countries to achieve their development goals, and also towards the just transition. So you can pause this at this stage, and you can look at this graph, and you can easily identify how these uneven distribution of usage of the carbon budget has led to the climate injustice in the current world. So after discussing about the historical responsibility and uneven usage of carbon budget between developed, developing and least developed countries, we will now be discussing about the other facets to climate justice, which is within the countries. And in this, the first one is structural inequalities. So even within the same country, the impacts of climate change may be felt unevenly due to structural inequalities based on race, ethnicity, gender, and socio-economic status. Women are more severely affected by climate change impacts because they have access to fewer resources to adapt and cope with abrupt changes. People with disabilities are at increased risk of the adverse impacts of climate change, including threats to their health, food security, access to water and sanitation, energy and livelihoods and sanitation, particularly in developing and least developed countries. Also, indigenous population who protect around 80% of the world's biodiversity are facing increasing threats and risks to their lives, livelihood, and traditional knowledge. So we can see that women and people with disabilities and indigenous people are the most affected communities within the country. And the next one is about the socio-economic inequalities. So the impact of climate change and the resources needed to address the climate change impacts are distributed unequally around the world. Low-income countries and vulnerable populations within those countries are more susceptible to climate-induced loss and damage. Globally, the 10% of the household with highest per capita emissions contribute around 35 to 45% of the global household greenhouse gas emissions, while bottom 50% contribute just 13 to 15% of the GHG emissions. So you can see how unequal greenhouse gas emissions takes place, considering the socio-economic status of the families and the households. The next one is about intergenerational inequity. So, children and young people today have not contributed to the climate crisis in a significant way, but they will be bearing the full force of climate change impacts as they advance through their life. This is because the human rights are threatened by the decision of previous generations. Their rights must be centered in all climate decision making and action. So these three are some of the facets to climate justice which should be taken or which should be considered while making any future development or making any future developmental pathway of the countries. So now let's discuss about the importance of climate justice and the obstacles which it is facing. So let's start first with the importance of climate justice. So climate change is a human rights issue. All people should have the agency to live their life with dignity. However, the climate crisis is causing loss of lives, livelihoods, language, and culture, putting many at risk of food and water shortages and triggering displacement and conflicts. The climate crisis impedes the right to good health as well. Rising temperatures, increased frequency of extreme weather events, polluted air and water contribute to significant health impacts, including heat stress, diseases outbreaks, malnutrition, and trauma from having lived through disasters. The impacts are most severe for vulnerable populations who have limited means to adapt to climate change impacts. Between 2010 and 2020, human mortality from flood, droughts, and storms was around 15 times higher in the highly vulnerable regions compared to the regions with very low vulnerability. The climate crisis also has impacts on a country's education system. When temperatures are too high or extreme weather event hits, for example, it can damage infrastructure or damage the educational institutions. This threatens the ability of parents to send their children to school, impacting the futures of the younger generations. Then, climate justice is also an important aspect of just transition towards a sustainable future. Local communities, especially informal workers and other vulnerable marginalized people or population, can be harmed in this transition if not protected and consulted. For example, there are increasing concerns about human rights violations related to mining for minerals needed to produce like batteries for electric vehicles or some other industrial processes, so that are impacting their life. Currently, those who have least contributed to the climate crisis are being disproportionately affected by this. Climate justice suggests that the responsibilities in addressing climate change should be divided according to who is contributing most to the problem, while addressing systemic, socio-economic, and intergenerational inequalities. So these are all the important factors. That's why the climate justice has become so important, and this is like talked all around the world within different seminars and different meetings, and you can say conferences. Then now we will talk about the obstacle which the climate justice is facing. There are many challenges that countries and communities face on the road to achieve the climate justice. The first or the like one obstacle is the lack of transparency and inclusion in climate negotiation and plans. The voice of women, youth, indigenous people, and marginalized groups are integral to the future of our planet, and it is essential that they have access to platforms where they can participate in decision making and implementation of policies and plans. However, underrepresentation of these voices may be victims of tokenism, meaning that they are sometimes included with the intention of appearing inclusive, but having only marginal roles or lacking empowerment in those discussions. The another obstacle is the lack of access to education and resources on the environment, climate change, and human rights. This prevents people, often those most affected by the problem, from making the necessary connections and participating in the relevant policy discussions. Language barriers can often pose a challenge as well, especially for local communities and indigenous peoples participating in these decision making and the negotiations. Then, in many countries, environmental activists and defenders are facing dangerous consequences for demanding environmental rights and justice. They may be jailed, threatened, or subjected to violence, or forced disappearances, or even murdering of these activists and defenders also took place. This creates an unsafe environment for defenders to come forward and demand these justice. At the global level, more vulnerable countries have been advocating for more financial and technical support from the rich countries, like from over a decade it is going on, while there has been some recent progress on potential finance for loss and damage. Currently, like in this particular COP meeting, which was held in Dubai, the loss and damage fund was being implemented. So many estimates have been concluded that rich countries have yet to reach that $100 billion annual climate finance which they have committed, which was agreed in 2009 and expected to start in 2020, but still that is like this is long due and is pending. Countries are already working on coming up with a new negotiated annual goal, as that existing target is not adequate, or it is not a science based target, and more finance is needed annually to address these increasing global warming. But still, like as I have mentioned, these four obstacles are the main one that is causing climate justice, or causing, in fact, causing climate injustice as of now. So let's see in the future what rolls out with respect to all these points which I have discussed. So now let's discuss about some of the solutions for achieving climate justice, which looks a little bit difficult or tricky while doing the on-ground implementation, but it's not impossible to achieve these solutions. So the first one is about investing in climate adaptation measures and supporting vulnerable communities, including coastal regions and small island nations, through resilient infrastructure and community-based programs. Then the second one is about facilitating the transfer of clean technologies to developing countries and promoting knowledge sharing platforms to enable low carbon transition. Then next one is about mobilizing funds to support climate justice initiatives, including fulfilling the goal of providing $100 billion US dollars annually in climate finance to assist developing nations. Then ensuring the meaningful involvement of marginalized communities, indigenous people, and vulnerable groups in climate policy making processes. Then promoting the climate justice through educational programs and awareness and capacity building initiatives to enhance the understanding and encouraging the climate action, collective action towards the climate action. And last but not the least is about strengthening the global collaboration, such as binding Paris Agreement, which has been ratified by 194 countries, and that aims to limit global warming through binding commitments and financial support. So these are some of the solutions which all the governments, like whether it is at the country level or the global level, needs to implement so as to achieve the climate justice in the coming future. So that was it in today's video. Hope you got to learn a lot, or at least something about the concept of climate justice and why this is important for our future generation. If you have any doubts or queries, then please feel free to ask me in the comment box. I will be happy to answer. Uh, we will meet next time with some new interesting topic, raising awareness about the climate change and sustainable development. Till then, bye bye and namaskar.